to report that an additional 22 people have returned to duty, now totaling 613 of the 722 have survived this virus and have recovered and are back at work. We currently have 122 personnel that are quarantined and are at home, awaiting results and or recovering from this virus. Tomorrow, we will be, under Chief Grimala's leadership, we'll be fashioning a document together reminding our personnel of all the various steps that are to be taken and requirements and protocols, whether it be personal protective equipment, hand sanitizer, boot sanitizers, the protective clothing and masks, face coverings, and our expectations and requirements that those masks and face coverings be used when in public as well as in our work sites that are here. Additionally, given the purple state that the county is in, we're encouraging our people to recognize and honor the safeguard provisions of Safer at Home. And as we approach this holiday season, we have seen a dramatic impact on our local ability here in our stations and so forth, where we will not be having the more traditional Thanksgiving lunches and other various gatherings for our people, just given the safety and health consequences that need to be practiced during this critical time. Regarding our support of the mayor's directive of Safer at Home, this last week, in working with the mayor's office as well as with the Office of Operations, we will be conducting off-hour evening checks of certain gyms and taverns and other locations that are in violation of the Safer at Home essential businesses operating standards. What that means, and simply stated, is that the ambassador program, which is conducted generally Monday through Friday during day watch hours, is primarily responsible for those violators to go out and give them citations and take enforcement action relative to violators. However, on off hours, evening hours, and weekends, those resources are not available. Now, the numbers are small, usually 3 to 4 calls a week. However, we are ensuring that those radio calls will be dispatched via communications, and we'll have an audit trail, and a supervisor will be dispatched to respond to those locations to ensure that appropriate enforcement actions taken. While we recognize this is an added burden on our department, I believe it's measured, and it's certainly appropriate given the state of this pandemic and the surge state that we're in, to control the business operators that are not heeding these requirements and are jeopardizing community health and safety by their continued operation. Moving forward as to significant events, this last week we had no categorical uses of force, but I do want to draw attention to a hit and run felony collision that occurred at 7th Street and Broadway. And in that collision, where we announced a $25,000 reward, the facts and circumstances was a male pedestrian was walking northbound on Broadway at 7th when he was hit by a 4-door dark vehicle, possibly a Dodge Avenger. On the 15th of November, we published a media release on this, and I just want to use this as a framework to identify that while traffic safety in Los Angeles has improved, and we believe it is directly related to the Safer at Home and the reduced travels, we are seeing an overall reduction in fatal traffic collisions. We have seen an increase in the South Bureau, in South Los Angeles, particularly in regards to pedestrians such as just this person here that was struck in a hit and run by a motorist, as well as in cyclists and pedestrians. So I just want to draw attention for our public, our community members, those that are in the roadway, that they be mindful of the fact that while they may have a lawful right to be in that roadway, in that crosswalk, or at an intersection, that there are members of the public and the motoring public that are either through inattention or intoxication or other reckless actions pose a real danger to the safety of a pedestrian and a cyclist. Likewise, for those motoring in the public, it is critical that they pay attention to their surroundings, that they ensure that they are able and capable of driving responsibly, and that if they hit somebody and have an accident, that they not make it a crime by fleeing the scene, and that they stay and take responsibility for their actions. Many times, pedestrians and or cyclists may be in the wrong. Their actions may be the underlying influence of what that collision occurred, but by the person fleeing the scene and failing to remain and present and offer aid, they commit a felony, and it's a very serious matter. And of course, the guilt and the burden that they face going forward, having to live with themselves and being involved in such a such an instance is probably the greatest reason why they should stop and act responsibly. Now, moving over to crime, this last week we did see a slowing in our homicides and shooting violence, but it still remains way too high. And this weekend was particularly difficult when we had a homicide in Harbor Division involving a young woman who had a 7-month unborn child. It appears that in that investigation that it is gang involved and that she was not the target at this preliminary state of that attack, but another individual was. But it was a senseless murder of her as she sat in a vehicle with her unborn child. Additionally, we had a double murder in Newton Division on a Saturday night at a warehouse location involving what I'll term as an underground party. It's a prohibited activity, should not have been there. But at the same time, these two women were suddenly assaulted and without any provocation, and both of them lost their life. And then lastly, yesterday, tragic circumstances where an individual in the downtown area of Los Angeles was working on a disabled vehicle, and for reasons still unknown, was suddenly and viciously attacked. And while he fled the scene and went to a nearby location to seek aid, he unfortunately succumbed to his injuries. So while we saw a slowdown last week in shooting violence that reduced to 28 shooting victims versus 34 the week before, the numbers are still higher than they were last year at this time and still well above our week-to-week average. Southeast and 77th continues to represent 10% of the violent crime in the city. So those focus points of the downtown core and South Los Angeles are areas of our interest and attention, as well as persons experiencing homelessness. The number of homicides involving persons experiencing homelessness as victims has now grown to 19%. That number earlier was was as low as 10%, as 12, 13, 14%. But the percentage of homicide victims that are persons who are houseless has grown, as has the overall number of homicides. So which only speaks to the increased volume that we have, and not just by a percentage, but as you know, there's 58 additional homicides this year versus last. So the proportionality has grown as well as the pure numbers of that. What's critical here is that our efforts last night, I was on a town hall meeting with Councilman Bonin and with many members from West LA and Pacific Division, as well as command staff. And we heard repeatedly about concerns for persons experiencing homelessness, the shelters, the outreach, the engagement. And I can only use this as yet another opportunity to implore that our county leaders and that our mental health, LAHSA, and other resources be amplified. Community-based organizations are vitally needed to find the resources that on and off hours can provide outreach and engagement to this at-risk population and afford them with housing and opportunities that will get them into a shelter and off of the street. That this is a population that is gravely at risk, not only from the criminal element, people who wish to prey on them, but also within others within the homeless community as well. Moving over to the officer-involved shootings, as I said, there was no officer-involved shootings or categoricals this last week. So our numbers have remained the same, with 3 in custody deaths year to date versus 3 last year. Our average is just under 4 at this time each year. And our officer-involved shootings, we remain at 26. Last year, that number was 22. Our 4-year average is just under 31. Our number of fatals this year remain at 7. Last year, that number was 10, and our 4-year average is 13. We continue to post our staffing numbers online, and we closed this last week at 9,854 sworn members of the organization. This number continues to reduce approximately every 4 weeks, and that number will land on about 9,750 by March or April. Our civilian population workforce is now at 3,004. That number was 3,044. So that number is going to reduce to 2,850 over the course of implementing our budget cuts that have been requested or directed to the organization. Relative to the reorganization, we are currently in a meeting confer process with our league representatives to move approximately 250 personnel from specialized posts and assignments to augment our staffing at each of the geographic areas. In addition to that, we'll be disbanding our HOPE teams and some other specialized resources in an effort to ensure that our patrol workforce is fully staffed, as well as that our investigations are properly staffed, particularly on violent crimes. This will also entail a reduction in our desk hours. Once our desks are reinstated, will be reduced to daytime hours, Monday through Friday. And then also we'll be beginning the first of the year, transitioning some of our services to online reports in lieu of in-person investigations. Traffic collision investigations that do not involve a crime, and other crime investigations that can be captured remotely by allowing victims to upload photographs and so forth into a crime report will be an alternate service delivery method that we'll be implementing as a means of providing our personnel with an appropriate sized workload given the size of their staffing. And with that, I conclude my remarks and happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Chief. Much appreciated. Chief, could you provide us with your assessment of the anticipated impact of what you just talked about, the removal of specialized units and transferring people to patrol? What would you anticipate being the impact on the community?
We're going to have to pay close attention to those investigations that those specialized resources were involved in to ensure that they, as they're now transferred out to the geographic areas and bureaus, that they still have the same level of intensity and like expertise. I believe that we can accomplish that. To give you a scale of example, homicides are in every division except Harbor are part of a centralized investigative function out of South Bureau Homicide, West Bureau, Valley Bureau. Harbor Division has its own investigative unit. However, the staffing there is at a much higher density than what we see for homicide investigations in South Bureau. So by combining Harbor Homicide into South Bureau Homicide, we are going to improve the staffing for South Bureau, which has seen an increase in homicides this year, increase in shooting violence, and at the same time, we'll still investigate those homicides that are occurring in Harbor from that centralized post. So there is a means of trying to minimize the impact of 350 fewer people, but there are 350 fewer people. The key on this is that we stop doing things the way we're doing them. For instance, the traffic collision reports. Those are about 40,000 reports a year that will be shifted to an online portal, as well as other criminal investigations that will be shifted from an officer responding into the field and conducting an in-field investigation to a report online. Now, those investigations will still have some investigative oversight, but many of those investigations that we are shifting to an online portal typically have little or no investigative follow-up value, other than knowing where the incident occurred as a means of proximity, understanding where crime is occurring, to identify underlying suspects that are responsible, offenders that are responsible, the recovery of property. But for the most part, there's no immediate investigative follow-up from the scene. So shifting it to an online portal saves officers time in the field so that they can tend to matters that do have investigative follow-up, that do have the ability for them to pursue. This is not a desired course of action, meaning that this reimagining and shifting of this is to deal with a reduction in workforce that I don't believe is causing this increase that we're seeing in violent crime, but it does come at a very bad time for this increase. Lastly, in regards to the other areas that we're downsizing, Metropolitan Division, for instance, is downsizing their what was previously crime suppression platoons, and they are now been fashioned as shooting response teams that are going out and, for instance, on a Hollenbeck shooting or these other downtown LA shootings, these shooting response teams are supporting the local stations in doing investigative follow-up. The reassignment of those personnel from Metropolitan Division will go to those areas, and they'll be made available to those commanding officers to do those investigations, to continue that extra emphasis. What the overarching goal here is to give 21 areas the maximum amount of personnel possible to remain in a generalist function to serve across many investigative needs, as well as community engagement, problem-solving initiatives, so that we do not have a workforce that is overly specialized when we see the impact of our smaller workforce and it's on us. Lastly, on the administrative side of the house, the reduction of civilian personnel, I am significantly concerned because we have had a delay in the issuance of the initiation of a police service representatives, PSR class, which are the people who run our communication center, as well as a detention officer class, which are the men and women who work in our custody services. We are working with the CAO now and the managed hiring committee, because we are in a hiring, and we are in a freeze, if you will, for promotions, upgrades, and hiring, except for the permission by city council and the mayor's office. And I'm discussing with them now, because managed attrition with separation incentive program, as well as just expected retirements and separations, if we cannot continue to hire detention officers, I'll be forced to shut down area station jails such as Harbor Pacific, Hollywood, as a means of focusing our remaining personnel in those 3 regional jails. Lastly, I've challenged each of us administratively as senior direct reports and all the way down to each of the area stations to identify what reports, what administrative actions are we doing that we can curtail, that we can slow. Perhaps a weekly report needs to become a monthly or quarterly report. We need to maintain oversight, and we need to maintain vigilance in our systems and controls, but we also have to recognize that with the downsizing of our workforce, we're having fewer and fewer people to do these tasks. So we need to prioritize, and we're in the process of doing that now, whether it's from our record clerk operations and our geographic stations to our bureau operations as to the types of audits, reports, and investigations that they conduct and the frequency of those activities. So it's a managing process of with 500 fewer personnel, the likelihood of furloughs also coming on board in January, which will further reduce our civilian workforce because of mandated days off. This is a challenging time for us, but we're committed to working through it and doing the best we can for the safety of the city.
Thank you, Chief, for the efforts of yourself and the command staff in trying to manage the fiscal issues, along with becoming more efficient along the process and not having a negative impact on the community. I am deeply concerned about certainly the detention officer class and the PSR class, and would appreciate providing the commission further updates as you see fit in the very near future, so we can monitor that more closely. I know we have a number of significant matters on the agenda. I'm going to defer my remaining comments and allow other commissioners to ask questions. Commissioner Soboroff, I see your mic is open. Did you have a question of the chief?
Sure, a quick one. Basically, last week I talked about the baton being dropped, and I'm looking for any evidence, and maybe I'm just in the wrong place, that somebody is picking it up. So my question, Chief, is have you seen or felt? Have the rank and file felt any programs that have been increased to help people experiencing homelessness, to help people with these drug crises, with mental illness, that will alleviate some of the need for us to respond? And if you haven't seen them yet, I think that they, certainly they can come from the city, but also recommendations from the community activists, from philanthropy, from anyone. Just like, where's the beef? What's happening?
So last night's community meeting, I want to thank Deputy Mayor Jeff Gorell for attending it as well and updating the public on just this very question. And his description that the $151 million reduction in the department, if you will, the movement of that funding, 40 million of it was earmarked for deferring furloughs for the civilian workforce in the city, so that the civilian workforce would not be reduced. And then the remaining amount has been set aside and the council has control of it, and determining alternate services that have been envisioned that the department will transfer the baton to. And that's currently under the leadership of Council President Nuri Martinez and others that are listening and have taken community input. They've had a series of town halls, and it's my understanding that they continue to contemplate and will determine at some point how those funds will be utilized for this alternate service method. I'm greatly concerned because the mayor's office and with the cooperation and support of the council did establish 5 therapeutic vans that are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They'll begin in January. However, they cover the entire city of Los Angeles. And so the volume of their work, their ability for us to transfer, say, 20,000 calls to them. It's kind of a model of the Cahoots model, which is out of Eugene, Oregon. It's a good model. It just needs to be greatly scaled up. And again, these are all within the purview of the city council. Lastly, the efforts with gang reduction, youth development, our intervention workers, our ability to be in community settings to deal with not only with persons who are houseless, but also individuals that are in the street and are at times resorting to violence and turmoil in our communities. Interrupting that through programming and support and alternatives is also critical as we go through this tumultuous time. So it's in the council is a short answer for the city, and of course the Board of Supervisors for the county.
Anything further, Commissioner Soboroff? No.
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, over the weekend, I heard somebody say, you know, vaccines don't cure anything, but vaccinations do. And I just want to extend that to this. Contemplation doesn't help one person. Implementation does. And while this baton is sitting on the ground, and while we're having to cut back and affect the citizens of Los Angeles and our officers, one thing that is increasing, even if it isn't crime, is the effects of homelessness, the effects of drug issues, and the effects of mental illness. We all see it. I'm sure that's what your discussion was yesterday, and it's extremely frustrating to hear about. Not just from the city. I mean, where are the community recommendations? Where are the philanthropic recommendations? I mean, this baton is on the ground and the race is still going. So it's a frustrating situation for all of us, and especially the men and women of the Los Angeles Police Department. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions from commissioners, please alert me if you have a question. Open your microphone, Commissioner Bonner, please go ahead.
Sure, thank you. I wanted to just pick up on a couple of points that Commissioner Soboroff was just making, because in my view, we should not make the mistake of just seeing a city silo and then a county silo and a bunch of silos, that we're all operating in and maybe potentially disconnected with and unaware of what's going on in the others. And I mentioned last week something that I'm still interested in understanding how we're all understanding, and that is the implementation of Measure J. And however anyone voted on that measure, the fact is that the county voters, and many of whom are, and I would imagine the overwhelming majority of whom are Los Angeles City residents, voted to approve Measure J. That is the measure that's designed to provide substantial funding, probably not nearly enough, but substantial funding for the kinds of investments that Commissioner Soboroff was asking about. Now, sure, some of those, county programs versus city programs, but the fact of the matter is homelessness and some of the other maladies that we're concerned with, don't know borders. And so it's my assumption that we need to, or my belief that we need to understand how those resources are going to be allocated and invested in order to then answer some of the questions that were just put on the table. And there's an entire infrastructure that's being put in place to pull in a vast swath of stakeholders, from all around, not just communities, but business, labor, government, and the like, to participate in that very robust conversation as to how to allocate those resources and make those investments in the community. And so if the part of the belief is that having stronger communities and having more investment in social services and the like can reduce the need for law enforcement as the solution to many problems, then it seems to me that we should be talking about how to understand that conversation and where those investments may be made, how that conversation may line up with the CSP Bureau's plans to develop these community safety strategic plans and the like, so that everybody can really understand what is the opportunity to leverage and build off of and get greater impact from with the minimal resources that are being made available. So I just want to, just comment. I see that as something that should not be ignored. I think by design, clearly, it's not. Those resources are very appropriately not for investment in law enforcement related activities. But it doesn't mean you can't be at least aware of or connected to the conversation in some way that may be helpful to understand how we can get some greater impact from the investments as well. So anyway, that's really, and I don't know if I had mentioned this once before, and I guess I can maybe leave it with a question with the chief as to whether there's any such plans to do any of that, to have the CSP Bureau connected with some of the stakeholders that are going to be participating in that implementation, understand the limits of what they may be doing, how it may be able to, we may be able to leverage some of what CSP is doing.
So I met just yesterday with Sheriff Villanueva. We have our standing meeting, and we talked this very matter about Prop J, and both of us are look forward to that committee, and will be an active participant in any invited setting to understand and help understand for public safety how these resources are going to be developed and implemented. We do work with the CCJCC, the criminal, the coordination committee that's chaired by a board of supervisor that does have some of these conversations. Deputy Chief Chris Pitcher attends on my behalf. It may be a bit premature with just the passage of this last week or 2 weeks ago, but we have been a member of criminal justice reform for more than a decade, an active voice. And I spoke with DA-elect George Gascon last Friday. Welcome him to his new position, and committed to joining with him in the efforts of improving public safety here in Los Angeles, and him joining with the rest of the criminal justice system for that same goal. So we have good partnerships here in LA County, LA City, and this is an area that we certainly are very interested in better understanding. But I will also say that in the absence of information, at times that's because of an absence of a plan. So this is not a matter of a great, significant, deeply rooted and staffed plan of hundreds of personnel that are going to suddenly arrive, and the department is flat-footed, not understanding it. In fact, that's part of the frustration.
Understood. I would say, at least, and we'll get a chance, I think, to talk a little bit more about that and with some of the other agenda items. But just going back to the issue, at least as Commissioner Sobroff is framing it, and there's lots of different ways that many elements of the conversation may be framed. But I am noting that, yeah, I agree that if you're looking only at the city standpoint, there's a big question where the city's going to go. I would like to see them move forward with the motion that asks you to look at how to move some more traffic enforcement functions out. And I don't know what more that whether it's me as a commissioner or us as a commission or the department or anyone, can do to move that conversation along. But you also need willing partners on the other side. I've understood the chief's conversation here that the city's Department of Transportation is not lining up to take on those functions. I don't believe the people who make the policy determinations and the decisions about resources have pushed the conversation really as to how that can be done and whether that direction ought to be given. In other words, that's what elected officials do, is make decisions on behalf of the people. So they could, in theory, direct the Department of Transportation to develop a plan to undertake this, and they could fashion decisions about where to find the resources and how it could be implemented. And some of that may be in the plan. I'm not sure. My recollection was that motion was passed some months ago, and we were expecting some time in September or October there would be some further conversation about it in the council. And so if anyone has information on where that is, I'd appreciate knowing that. Don't want to belabor it, but my point is that when I referenced Measure J, I'm just pointing out again that there are clearly legal differences between the city and the county, and jurisdictional differences. But where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, or where people actually live, there's not a distinction between the city and the county. The fact is that there's going to be some additional resources being invested in communities, and we should find ways to help make those investments as successful as possible. And just lastly, I think this other issue about the Department of Transportation, mental health, these other issues, I think we should find ways if there's more that we can do, whether it's in advocating for those measures, what have you. Certainly willing to do that, but we need to have some sort of plan for, aside from coming in and getting a few comments here on the record in our Tuesday morning meetings. I'm speaking to myself, of course, so that's not an implied point to anybody else. I'm saying that that's my frustration, is that feels in many days the limitations of what I can do as a commissioner is to try to bring voice to some issues, but nobody elected me to anything, as I'm often reminded, and therefore I don't have the ability to actually make those determinations. Now, if we have a plan, I can set up meetings, I can go in, I can advocate for certain things, but it takes some sort of plan really to do that. And so that's what I hope that we'll at some point get to.
Well, I think, yeah, to your point, and the plan is not the department. This is the department sits at a round table with a shared responsibility. I don't believe, I'll say just as a professional, I'm not aware of the ability for DOT to mechanically go out and accomplish traffic enforcement and what's been envisioned. Now, however, that's why laws change and statutes change and so forth. I don't know that the outcome, how much of the outcome would be any different than by LAPD conducting traffic enforcement. And certainly we recognize with the loss of life and traffic safety that the need for enforcement as one of the means of curtailing driver behavior and pedestrian behavior so that we save lives. Law enforcement LAPD has a significant and important role. But notwithstanding that, what we've done and what I want to showcase is we've taken the dramatic step of stopping the investigation of non-crime related traffic reports. Not because I'm interested in stopping that service to members of the community, because I believe that many people are much more impacted by a traffic collision that's not criminal, but just as an accident, than they are property crime or violent crime. And so they look to public government to help them through that engagement, to help facilitate the conversation with that driver or that other person that they had this collision with, and write a report that they can use for their purposes for insurance or otherwise. But simply stated, with these cutbacks in services, I can no longer afford for the department to do that less essential function. And yet DOT says they don't have the Department of Transportation does not have the resources and nor the willingness to step in there. And from a policy standpoint, which is really the council and the elected leadership, that's where the ball lays. So the plan is the plan. The plan is out there. The conversation, the baton is there. We can talk about the baton in several different fashions, but it's still just that someone's got to pick it up. And if they're not picking it up, then this, from my point, is what I'm really concerned about is we can stop certain things, and yet, and the public will have to recognize that in this curtailment, this reimagining, redirecting the department, these are functions that we're no longer going to be able to do. These are crime investigations that we'll do online because we have to choose the most efficient and economic use of our resources. But alternate services, such as for people in a mental health crisis, outreach and engagement with people experiencing homelessness, creating small disturbances in neighborhoods, we need hundreds of people to be available to transfer those calls to. And what I'm not aware on a state or city level is anyone scaling that up. So the plan is to talk about that. But the construct of the plan is not upon this department. It's upon the other people who have envisioned this realignment.
And I would just say that I agree and appreciate that relative to in an ideal world, the way I would like to see this is you have the broad policy people, elected officials buying into a broad vision of what the people, their constituents are telling them they want and need from law enforcement and from LAPD. There would be a clear understanding of what that is. Right now, the question is, are there major changes in that from what it's been historically or not? So we would get some clarity around that. Our role in terms of intermediary between the council and the department would be to not only understand that, but to participate in isolating, identifying the policy trade-offs and decisions that need to be made, and to then further adopt policies that are consistent with what they're doing. Your role hopefully would be implementation, would be brass tack strategies and tactics around actually how to perform the mission, in the street. So everybody's got a role to play, and all of that needs to be done in partnership with the communities, because that's the other weak link here, is that none of us can create that and then hand it down anywhere throughout the city and say this is what's going to happen. What it needs to have some co-ownership, much more so than what we have right now at various levels, so that everybody understands really that it's an approach, a product as to where LA is going and where LAPD is going into the future. Communities would feel they're getting the service they need from the department, and officers would have the assurance and the confidence that they're working in a way that's consistent with what the people that they're serving feels is appropriate, and move on. But it's a lot of conversation that, to get to part of, I think what you're hearing from me and some others is it's we're kind of pushing the puck around, or the baton, whatever we want to call it, a little bit, in terms of here's what we can do now. What are you doing? Here's what we can do. And at some level, I'm looking for a way that we can get all of the right people into one conversation at some level, whether it's very high level or otherwise, in order to get more clarity on what everybody's really being asked to do. Anyway, so that's that. We'll have some more conversation about this. So I'll leave it at that, and look forward to continue the conversation.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonner and Commissioner Soboroff and Chief, for highlighting, I think, what is a frustration among all commissioners of cuts being made to the department, and then simultaneously not knowing the plan, hearing the constant dissatisfaction of the community, whether they're dissatisfied with the cuts that have been made, and mindful of the rising crime rates, or those who are rightfully looking for where are the services going to be and resources going to be placed in the community, and not seeing any of that action, only seeing the cuts being made. And it is certainly a very frustrating situation for all of us. Thank you, both commissioners, for bringing that up and articulating that. Commissioner Goldsmith or Kalanche, do you have questions of the chief? Seeing no microphones being opening. Thank you, Chief, for the report. Madam Secretary, could you please commence with the public comment period? Thank you.
Okay, first we have Hamid Khan, followed by Zach Sherwin.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
All of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
So I just want to first of all start off by this whole BS that Soboroff is picking about the baton and the puck and all of that. That as if, like, this is a classic case of demonization of what's happening, that within 2 months there's going to be a magic pill all of a sudden, that everything is going to be present, everything is going to be there, after years and years and years of all the resource that is being sucked up by this violent department. And what is happening is that now we are getting the PPL to hold the whole city hostage, as to paralyzing everything, where they are just now pushing their muscle, supposedly, that not to meet with the city and this, that, and the other. So we've seen this drama before, and we're not going to get caught up into the sensationalizing by people like Steve Soboroff and others. Today, you're going to be voting on some very key items. And yesterday, the LAPC Fails Group, which includes the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, Black Lives Matter, Los Angeles Community Action Network, and White People for Black Lives, held a press conference just demanding an end to the pretextual stops, the practice of pretextual stops, demanding the immediate dismantlement of the Metro unit, demanding the immediate end of data-driven policing and all use of risk assessments and algorithms, and an immediate end to the 45-minute maximum public comment rule. The reason why we are placing these demands and demanding that you immediately work on them as well, that the numbers that show exactly what's been going on, but these are not even like the full numbers. This is not even the full picture of 712,000 stops, out of which almost 28% happen to be people from the Black community, of 734 allegations and 0 sustained, looking at them in light of the last 10 years from 2010 to 2019, of almost 5,000 allegations of bias policing with 0 sustained. So what we have here is clearly an element that absolutely the department is rejecting, any way that people are trying to file complaints and people are trying to reach out. You file a written complaint, it comes back that it can't be sustained because people are lying. When people try to come up to this supposedly this citizen oversight or civilian oversight commission, they are silenced because now the maximum access is down to 45 minutes. So something has to change. And once again, our demands are very clear, that we can talk about the numbers. We can just try to sanitize this by getting the academy involved in this thing, like what we saw a couple of weeks ago from University of California, Irvine. But the facts on the ground remain. We had people who were directly impacted as of these stops. They talked about the level of humiliation. They talked about the level of dehumanization. They talked about the level of violence and the trauma they had to go through. So end this practice of pretextual stop, dismantle the metro unit, end data-driven policing and use of risk assessment and algorithms, and end this facade of 45-minute maximum public comment rule.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Zach Sherwin, followed by Heather C.
Hello.
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
I would like to speak on all items.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay. Chief, every week you talk about COVID numbers and PPE and safety, and there's this like one of your 5 parts of your report, and you just never address the masklessness of your officers, which just week after week, seeing officers with masks on for me has become like an exception. I'm surprised when I see it. So your words every week in this meeting are like spritzing Axe body spray on a pile of rotting trash. It just does not address the issue in any meaningful way whatsoever. You mentioned that you're going to be going to gyms and taverns and looking for violators. You've got a force full of officers who are, not playing by the rules. And I also wish you good luck when you travel back in time to the Middle Ages and go to those taverns. You clearly are not engaging with this in a meaningful way. So I just want to say to other people who might be listening, just because it's normal now to never see cops wearing masks doesn't mean it's okay. And not only is it a problem on its own, it is also indicative, I think, it's like a microcosm of the recklessness and lawlessness of the LAPD, despite Chief Moore's words in here. Chief Moore, your leadership is bankrupt. I'm going to disagree with Commissioner Decker, who stated last week that she thinks you're the right chief to lead this department forward, so she's in the tank. I, by contrast, hope you'll be gone very soon. Commissioner Decker said that as part of a speech last week in which she closed public comment with some soaring rhetoric about the role of the commission and the importance of listening. And so I just want to respond to a few points of that. Commissioner Decker, you began this speech by emphasizing this commitment to listening that you have and how you listen to everyone who takes time out of their busy lives to call in. I find this really hard to reconcile with the 45-minute public comment period that you impose and continue to impose. It's like saying we are really into eating healthfully and then just hosing bags of Doritos one after another. They just are incompatible. And, there's this part where you declared the need for starting with the points on which we all agree. These are things that you hope are non-controversial, no matter what side of the issues that we're on. And then the first one you presented was, quote, "This department is filled with good, hardworking men and women who want Los Angeles to be a safe and wonderful place for all of us to live." If you think that is a non-controversial starting point on which we all can agree, then you have obviously not been doing your vaunted duty of listening to the dozens, if not hundreds of callers who are demanding to defund this police force. I personally reject this statement on this face. It's not about the individual officers. It is about the systemic racism of this police force and the way in which you and the other commissioners enable them to do the things that they do. If I could make an analogy, it's like you've been given a responsibility in the form of a baton, and stick with me here, it's as if you dropped the baton.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Heather C., followed by Michelle Manier-Fowl. Heather, you're on.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
All of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Thank you. The Inspector General's report is a clear contradiction of the DOJ's RIPA report, and the residents of LA deserve a thorough and published comparison between the two reports. It would be unethical and immoral for any of you commissioners to vote on this item until this is done. It's obvious that Inspector General Mark Smith's report is biased and incomplete. It was almost as if Mayor Garcetti and Eileen Decker directed him to come up with this garbage in order to fit an agenda. And this is not the time for special interests or political pandering when the safety of the community is at stake. We're up 25% in homicides and 30% in victims shot. Now is not the time. You are Mayor Garcetti appointed police commissioners. You're not judges. It's not your role to create law. It's your role to set policy and keep the people of Los Angeles safe. If you want to issue mandates that are contradictory to the Supreme Court rulings, then go become a judge. You're passing doctrine which is in direct conflict with the Supreme Court rulings. Your actions can and will not be allowed to stand. And if you insist on creating law, then be prepared for a lawsuit and media attention. As it is, none of you are qualified to be overseeing a large police department, since you're either rich businessmen or advocates with your own agendas and nonprofits looking to profit off of city and county contracts. You're leading our city down a path of increased crime, and the blood is on your hands. You're protecting the hurt feelings of some, and it's directly resulting in numerous deaths. How many people in poor communities have to die before you put their worth above the rhetoric of the George Floyd death? And a few people here and there that you heard somewhere talk about how they felt picked on by being pulled over by the police. Dale Bonner, it was obvious in your response to Soboroff that you have no plan or even an idea of a plan to help reduce skyrocketing crime in our city in the immediate future. You threw the question to Chief Moore, but it's your job to create and implement a plan to keep our city safe, and you're not doing your job. You're acting as a BLM advocate. We all know what's going to happen in the Measure J money. It's going to be diverted to insiders with nonprofits like Liberty Hill and Legacy LA. Long-term investments into community programs and nonprofits are not going to prevent murders that are happening right now in our city. You commissioners are all protected by LAPD's threat management unit and have no real world experience as to what it's like in gang infested neighborhoods in LA. Dale, I'm glad you went on a ride along recently with LAPD, but what all of you really need is to be dropped off on the street in Watts or South LA and left there for the day on your own. Better yet, stay there for a week and I'll pay for your stay in one of the many Fleabag motels so you can get a real taste of what it's like to live in fear of gangs and to actually want LAPD around doing proactive policing. I urge you all to not approve items 3A, B, and C. Defend the LAPD, not defund. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Michelle Manier Fowle, followed by Cheryl S. Oh.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, what items did you like to speak on?
All of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Thank you. I wanted to talk about, this is not an easy choice. And, you know, when we say defund the police, we're talking about allocating funds toward communities, putting that money towards education, not incarceration. We have a systemic problem with racism in America as a whole. I'm an activist. I'm a white person. I worked with the LA Police Department and have had a good experience with them. The Black and brown community is a totally different situation, and that does concern me. You know, I know that the LAPD aggressively targets Black and brown youth. For example, you know, 3,800 stops of Black youth under 18 compared to less than 1,000 of white for 2019. That is a really big problem. I was also one of the organizers on the march we did downtown on November 7th. And what I saw there was really disheartening because it was with Turla and some unions and lots of people of color. And the police were in full riot gear, and it was really disturbing to see that. And it's not the first time I've seen that. I saw that about 3 or so years ago in front of Dianne Feinstein's office. I was there supporting DACA, and there was maybe 100, not even 100 people there, and there was like 500 police in riot gear. So it sends a message that is terrifying. And, you know, I believe in Black lives, and I believe that they have been unjustly targeted since they've been here, and it's not right. And I am calling for defunding the police, and I am calling for reallocating those not to police officers, but to like social services, to housing, to things like that. Like we can actually accomplish all of those things if we're being honest. Also, the police budget has not been cut. It's about the same as it was last year. And it's also important to note that about a quarter of their budget goes to their pensions. So let's be honest about the conversations here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Cheryl S., followed by Lorena Sanguino. Cheryl S. Okay. It looks like Laura Sanguino is next. Lorena?
Yes,
Hi, you're on. What items would you like to speak on?
all of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay, good morning, Chief and Commissioners. Every week when I review the agenda and listen to these meetings, I do so with optimism, but then I read the agenda items and again, I'm disappointed to the point of trauma. Items 3A, 3B, and 3C is a joke. These items are actually on the agenda. I urge you not to approve 3A, 3B, and 3C. Do you even know how many YouTube videos are out there conducting quote unquote integrity checks on cops? People going up to police officers doing active investigations, asking stupid questions, then posting the videos on YouTube or social media. Why don't you demand those people obtain consent from officers first? Or have those people obtain consent from the person the officer is speaking to? Why? Because your mission is to demonize law enforcement and convince yourselves that criminals are the victims. Commissioners, you're sincerely out of touch with what really goes on in the community. And yes, I know you've been out on ride-alongs before, blah, 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 but you still don't know the people of the community. You don't care about the real victims of the community. I challenge you to take a walk on Manchester and Maine, not in a group or with officers, but by yourselves. Go relax at Harvard Park. Go to Vernon and Honduras. Try finding parking at the Jays. Walk a blade down Figueroa. Tell me how safe you feel knowing that your agenda items have caused crime to spike in the city, which has led to more real victim suffering. You really expect officers to obtain written consent and permission from gang members or 187 suspect? How would that play out? Oh, excuse me, your car matches the description of a rape suspect, but let me read the script because the lame-ass police commission won't let me police. What is wrong with you people? This all seems to be a deflection from the real problem here, and that's you. You're deflecting from the 28 shootings this week, 5 homicides of the week, and that all occurred under your watch. What you commissioners really want are police officers killed so that you can line your pockets. Why is this even on the agenda anyway? Case law already exists, but you commissioners are choosing to ignore it. Pennsylvania versus Mim found that police officers ordering a person out of a car following a traffic stop and conducting a pat-down check for weapons did not violate the Fourth Amendment. Terry versus Ohio, Fourth Amendment is not violated when a police officer stops a suspect on the street and frisks the person with probable cause if there's reasonable suspicion that the person is committing or about to commit a crime. On Wren versus the United States, unanimously found that any traffic offense committed by a driver was legitimate basis for a stop. Unanimous decision that included RGB. Are we supposed to honor RBG's wishes? Again, out of touch. How do you people not know that your proposals violate Supreme Court case findings? Once again, I urge you do not approve these proposals of yours because all you're doing is setting yourself up for a lawsuit. And Mark Smith, your report would not pass ethical standards of an institutional review board or any other ethics committee because the way you've skewed the numbers.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Cheryl S., followed by Kim.
Hi, I'd like to speak on general comment 3C and 3A, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Commissioners, thank you for serving as the citizen's voice in police affairs. Your concerns ought to be reflective of the community at large, and your reforms implemented ought to improve reducing crime and the fear of crime. The community at large are Angelinos who get up every morning, go to work, and provide for their families. As a community, we are concerned there is an increase, not reduction, in crime, especially with shootings and homicide. As a community, we have a greater fear of crime. The 911 operator response time takes much longer compared to other cities, and we need more officers. I think you said there are 382 less police officers now. Commissioners, we want all of those positions refilled. We are scared for ourselves and for our children. What kind of city are we passing on to the next generation? During the last few months, many people have purchased more guns and many have bought guns for the first time. Now that we're going to have a new DA, we are fearful Los Angeles crime will continue to increase. Many are fleeing the city and state. Please give all officers all available resources and tools to allow them to do their jobs, to serve and protect effectively. Commissioners, please don't tie their hands, which will endanger the community and endanger their own lives. 3C, please vote against 3C. This written consent form will endanger officers' lives and possibly the community at large. Most officers wear a body-worn video, so this won't apply to them, but what about detectives, narcotics, or vice? It is dangerous for them to have to stop and get written permission. A weapon could be pulled on them during that time-consuming process. Commissioners, please vote no on 3C. 3A, Commissioners, we likewise urge you to vote no on 3A and reject Inspector General Mark Smith's recommendations to implement more police reform. His report is biased. It completely ignores the Racial and Identity Profiling Act RIPA report, which factors not only the race of the suspect, but importantly also the location of the crime. Location is important because naturally more Black people will be pulled over than white or Asians in neighborhoods that are predominantly Black. Location matters. It's wrong to twist data to insinuate LAPD officers are racist in their stops. Commissioners, please vote no on 3A. Back to general comment. President Decker, please don't have a double standard when interrupting callers. Last week, you interrupted me when I mentioned an activist group who you pander to, and it's affecting the policies you set and the safety of our city. Several minutes later, you did not interrupt a caller when he addressed a female caller by name using derogatory names. President Decker, we see your bias multiple times now, and we are calling you out on it. Please be impartial. That is your responsibility. Thank you. Defend, not defund. LAPD, and God bless you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Kim, followed by Matthew. Kim. Okay, we'll come back to Kim. Next, we have Matthew.
Hi, good morning, guys. What
items would you like to speak on?
I would like to go in and talk on 3A, 3B, and 3C, as well as general comments.
Okay, 3 minutes.
All right, good morning, guys. Like as many people have said, this is very concerning on seeing all of these agenda items be placed. Officers don't have an intent biased against people of color. What happens is, as many people have said as already, if Black people in a predominant area are pulled over, you will get more Black people over. Same as if you pulled people in West Hollywood, you would get more white people pulled over. That's just how it goes. There is no race findings, no nothing like that. It's very sad to go in and see that people on the commission are willing to go and put police officers' lives in danger to go and get a written consent paper. Some people will even refuse just an infraction of a traffic. So if they go in and say, you're going to get arrested, or here's your Miranda rights, please sign that I told you this, and you expect them to go and sign that, that is utterly disrespectful to go in and say that law enforcement is going to go in and be protected by you guys. They have a target on their back as already and put stress onto them. As many as people have talked out in the field, they do not want to be parking lot cops. They want to go and do their job that they wanted to do and go and fulfill their duties. This is very concerning that this makes law enforcement not wanting to do their jobs in fear of their life or their families. As recently, there's been protests, quote unquote protests, of Alex Villanueva's address being on freeways. This is very concerning, and this puts lives in danger of law enforcement. It's very sad. How would you like your family or your loved one's address on a freeway showing where people hate you just because you wear a uniform and have a target on your back? That is very concerning and very sad. I definitely encourage commissioners to go and vote no on 3C. as well as a Hispanic man in LA. People that go and say, I'm white and I feel bad for Black and brown communities. I am Hispanic in Los Angeles. I know what it feels to be Hispanic in Los Angeles, and LAPD has been there for me many occasions, and they never went in and said, you're Hispanic, I won't take care of you. I feel like they take care of you even more, and they have so much respect for me and for the community. Thank you, LAPD, and thank you for your service. Defend, not defund.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Kim, followed by Adam.
Hello.
Hi, what items did you like to speak on?
Everything.
Okay, 3 minutes.
I just want to talk about, I'm getting really frustrated with hearing these reports every week. I mean, racism is a problem in this country. There is no disputing that. This country was founded on racism. The police department operates on racism. There is no way that when you look at the numbers and you see that the amount of Black people that are stopped versus white people, that is not based on racism. There is no fixing that problem. We've tried anti-bias training. We've tried this program. Well, we're going to do this and we're going to do that and we're going to do this, but the end result is still the same. And people, you know, if you want to say that police have targets on their backs, well, they can go home and take off their uniform and now nobody knows who they are. But when you have brown skin, there's nothing you can do. You can't take off your brown skin and go out in the community and then feel safe. Black and brown people do not feel safe in this community. And if you wonder why that people are having gun shootouts in their communities, is because when you constantly kill people of color and there's no consequence, what do you think that does to that person? What do you think that does to the Black community? They then start to devalue their own lives when the police that are supposed to protect them are killing them and there's no consequence. So when you do that over and over again, then they stopped feeling valued by their community, by the police, by anybody. So the problem is you need to use, this is why we want to defund the police. This is why we passed Measure J, which has nothing to do with the police, mind you. That money is supposed to go towards the community. So, you know, you've got to fix this problem. The only way to fix it is to defund the police. And anyone who wants to get up here and talk about what they don't know, they can just kiss my ass. I have nothing else to say.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Adam Smith, followed by Melanie Ochoa.
Hello?
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
I speak on the Chief's report, public comment in 3A.
Okay, 3 minutes.
And I would like to start with public comment. Ms. Decker, what the hell are you talking about? Ms. Decker, what the hell are you talking about? You don't make sense, we're gonna keep calling you out. You came on the commission 2 or so years ago. Took over for a baby who didn't want to let it go. Yeah, Steve, I'm talking at you. But regardless of who's leading, the impact will always show. LAPD's anti-Black every morning, every night. You call it data-driven, pretend that that's all right. But policing is built to protect supremacy of the white. So Miss Decker, what the hell are you talking about? Miss Decker, what the hell are you talking about? You don't make sense, we're gonna keep calling you out. You're an anti-Black racist and I'm gonna keep calling you out. Linda Fairstein. Now I'm gonna speak to the Chief's report. Chief, you talked about hit and runs and how leaving the scene of an accident makes it a felony. I'm curious, in January 2019, your head of the Force Investigation Unit, Commander Jeff Nolte, wrecked his company car, his LAPD vehicle, drunk, and fled the scene. He then retired and now tweets a lot about his love for Trump. wondering how many felonies was he hit with? It's almost like laws are written with the explicit intent of only being enforced on certain communities. And I guess that makes me think, which communities are over-policed and over-criminalized by the LAPD? All right, totally unrelated. Now I'm going to speak about the stop data. I mean, it's just so clear the intent behind the policing of the LAPD. We demand that you end pretextual stops, end the Metro Division, end any type of data-driven policing strategies of the LAPD, and end the limit on public comment. You all should be ashamed of yourselves. Especially Linda Fairstein.
Let's move on to the next speaker then, Madam Secretary.
Hi.
Madam Secretary, next speaker, please.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Melanie Ochoa, followed by Support More.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
3A and 3B.
Okay, 2 minutes.
This is Melanie Ochoa for the ACLU of Southern California. We are a member of the PUSH Coalition and fully endorse the coalition's recommendations. And I am also a member of the state RIPA board and a resident of South LA. So yet again, the Inspector General's office has provided the commission and the public with clear evidence of disparate policing. The record before this commission unambiguously demonstrates that Black and Latino residents are subjected to a fundamentally different form of policing than white residents of this city. And I'm not just talking about the reports on the agenda for today, but every report over the last few years that has looked into how LAPD officers exercise their discretion, including fabricating gang evidence, using force against people suffering mental health crises, their point system for identifying supposedly chronic offenders, and many more, has found that they treat Black and Latino folks differently and worse than whites. Is that the type of agency this commission wants to preside over? Because you have the power to change that. The IG's reports have consistently demonstrated that anytime officers have the authority to act, those actions will be to the great detriment of Black and Latino folks. The only possible solution to end bias policing is to stop granting officers this authority. An obvious solution is to simply end consent searches and pretextual stops, which is an approach that has been adopted in other jurisdictions and as part of consent decrees to address the disparities and unnecessary police action we see here. The chief, the PPL, and others have complained about the minimal cuts that the department is going to incur. Yet the department spends the vast majority of its time stopping people for traffic violations and conducting searches that have no reasonable relation to serious criminal activity. Stopping these unnecessary practices solves multiple problems, and it is the step that needs to be taken. Also, as a RIPA board member, after reviewing the DOJ's analysis of the 2019 stop data, we were extremely troubled by the racially disparate use of consent searches across agencies. And while unfortunately this data was presented too late in the process for us to address it in the best practices recommendations, the forthcoming report should at minimum acknowledge that other jurisdictions have addressed this problem.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Support More, followed by Chris Martin.
Hello.
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
Public comment, chief's report, and 3ABC.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I want to start with the public comment for the Madam Secretary. Could you please call the names of the first 15 or 20 speakers before the public comment period? For the past several weeks, I always believe my name is on the list, but for some reason, my name was never called. So is that possible if you can tell the first 15 names or first 20 names before the public comments? So if my name is on the list, I will just continue, wait. And if my name is not right there, I will just come back another week. So that will be very helpful. So otherwise I will just wait over and over again, but my name was never called. Thank you, Madam Secretary. For the chief's report, regarding for the chief's comments regarding the budget, I feels like we are in the direction that protest overrule the law. For some reason that in this year, people demand, many people demand defund the police. And right now, obviously, they succeeded. They made it. So next year, if they want to demand get rid of the LAPD, and then I believe they are going to continue to succeed. And then the following year, if they want to get rid of the city mayor, if they want to get rid of the city council, I believe maybe they're going to succeed. So I do not believe that, I have a hard time to believe that we live in a point that a protest can overrule the law. The protest can overrule the law enforcement. That is something I do not consider that is democracy, and I consider that is something is insanity. Another thing is that regarding the police stop. Well, I have a hard time to understand the logic. Why that? My criminal justice professor said, if neighborhood is safe, it's very safe, you will see the minimal police presence. If a neighborhood or area has a very high crime rates, then that's the focus of the police. And then if the police goes to a high crime area, and then people and then constantly focusing on their patrol on the high crime neighborhood, then what is wrong with that? And then if you pull me over, check my driver's license, check my fingerprint, check my DUI, check my criminal history, well, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I feel happy, and I have no fear, and I let you check everything, because I mean, there's nothing you're not gonna find anything. And at the same time, Chief Moore has a real tough job, and I support LAPD. Please continue the great work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Chris Martin, followed by Gina Viola. Hi, Chris, you're on.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay.
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
All of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm just here to say unequivocally that there is a rampant problem of racial profiling within the LAPD. And I can say that because I've been a victim of racial profiling. And one of the things that I can say unequivocally is that honestly, it doesn't matter how many degrees you got. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. When you're Black in America, you can still be a target of racial profiling. I can say that from experience because earlier this year in February, that's exactly what happened to me. I'm an attorney by profession, graduated from law school, did the right things they say you should do in order to, not have the police interact with you and treat you the way that they treated me. But I was just pulled over, detained, handcuffed, and made to stand against a gate for 2.5 hours on a cold February night as I was on my way to mentor some youth and young adults. And that was for no other reason than the fact that I'm a young black male in a nice car who allegedly fit a description. I'm actually going to make those officers' names and serial and badge numbers known, because they should be held accountable for their actions. Detective Tony Fitzsimmons, serial number 35345, Officer Vila, serial number 40754, and Officer Kanhura of 77th Street Department, serial number 41344. And within about 20 minutes of my detention, like, multiple members of the community came out and vouched for who I am and what I was doing. Even my mom was out there, and they could have done a simple Google search or, asked for my bar number. Of course, those officers didn't care. And I believe that they behaved the way that they did with me, not because they believed their actions were necessary, but because they believed that they could do it and that it wouldn't matter. And that's honestly the problem that plagues our justice system. And of course, the complaint that I filed against those officers went nowhere. And when you ask the department to investigate itself, rarely does it humble itself enough to acknowledge its faults and learn from the ways of its past mistakes. One of the most important things I asked was if they could politely loosen, I asked if they could loosen the handcuffs, and they responded by tightening them. That's just unacceptable. There is a problem.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Gina Viola, followed by Star. Gina, you're on. What items would you like to speak on?
The chief's report and general public comment, please.
Okay, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Chief Moore and Commissioner Bonner, get Measure J out of your mouths. Measure J was created specifically so that law enforcement and the legal system have absolutely nothing to do with those funds. The fact that you and Sheriff Villanueva are meeting to discuss Measure J, you're already committing atrocities against Measure J. You have no business dealing with Measure J, thinking about ways to get your paws on Measure J funds. Stay away from it. You have already skimmed off of every other budget line item in this city. Leave Measure J alone. I don't ever want to hear Measure J in this commission ever again. Commissioner Decker, your disdain for this part of the process just grows and grows and grows. At this point, we don't even see your screens anymore. We have no idea if you're even there. You have been limiting the public voice for weeks now since we went virtually. And one of the reasons you made the change was you cited that City Council uses this method. Well, I'm pleased to tell you that last week in a City Council committee meeting, the committee chair said that public comment needs to go back to the way it was and that we need to be speaking to each agenda item as it's discussed. So since you are committed to following City Council's process, I look forward to a return to the way public comment used to be and an opportunity to address each agenda item after it's been discussed. For the public at large, for those of you who can't say Black Lives Matter without thinking it is some sort of atrocity towards the police, you need to check yourselves. Black Lives Matter is here to stay. Defund the police is the way things are going.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Star, followed by Baba Keeley. Star, you're on.
Hi there. Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
Okay, 3A, 3C, and public comment, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you to Chief Moore for doing the best that you can under these circumstances for making sure that police officers are safe out in these nasty streets that they have to patrol this day and age. You know, their lives matter, and it's a shame that they're assaulted and what they're going through on a daily basis. So thank you for taking some measures to at least try and make their lives a little more safer and come home to their families every night. I want to speak in result to you know, the defunding the police and the departments that will be cut regarding sexual assaults and crime. This is a shame. This is an absolute shame that these departments will be cut. So any victim of a sexual assault will basically not have these services or these people to help them anymore. And it's basically just an insult to anyone that has to go through any type of assault of this matter. You know, this is not what the Me Too movement is founded on. And I want to say to Commissioners Kalanche and Goldsmith with their Liberty Hill organization that, you know, they're in cahoots with the mayor's wife. And I see this as just rerouting money from the police department and the community, rerouting it to basically just what profits them and what best serves their interests. And again, I see this as a huge, huge conflict of interest that these women are on the police commission board. This is sad in itself. How, oh, well, again, they were appointed by the mayor whose wife works with them. So that answers that. Regarding item 3C, consent to search with a verbal request first or a verbal approval first. Chief Moore, this is absolutely horrendous that a police officer has to give a verbal authorization and be approved to search someone. So if someone has an assault with a deadly weapon in the car, the police officer has to stand there and get approval from them and make.
Madam Secretary, did we lose the speaker?
I think, yeah, her audio might have failed, but she's still on our end.
She is. She doesn't realize she's on mute, or I don't see her, Madam Secretary. Let's move on to the next speaker then.
Okay, the next speaker we have is Baba Akili, followed by Jamie Garcia.
Yes, my name's Akili. I'm with Black Lives Matters LA. And I want to first of all talk about the police report, items A and B, and public comment. First of all, I want to start out by saying this 45 minutes is cowardly and absurd. And you use it to cut off discussion and real input, and it needs to end. Secondly, the report that you all are going to be dealing with today, this report is what Black and brown people have been telling the commission for years. And to suffer through the humiliation and embarrassment and the dehumanization of these stops without recognition and accountability builds more disrespect and distrust of the LAPD. And to all the racist and misguided folks who are out there who are going to say that, well, the police are just doing their jobs, that's BS. This is a racist institution, and the statistics prove it. And this notion about somehow or another, if you go to where more crime is, you're going to wind up stopping more Black people, is to imply that somehow or another that Black people are criminals. When if you look at the statistics that the department just issued, that when you stop white people, that somehow or another they aren't criminals. So that's bullshit, and you need to stop saying that, and need to stop denying that this is a racist institution. If you combine the fact that no complaints have been upheld, it's more of an example of that the police are infallible, untouchable, and unaccountable. The complaint process should be moved from the police department altogether. It should be accepted at nonprofits or churches or other areas. I don't feel comfortable going in to complain about the police to the police. And then finally, the recommendations don't go far enough. We are calling for the immediate end to pretextual stops, the immediate disbandment of the Metro Division, and immediate end to data-driven policing and the use of risk assessment and algorithms, and an immediate end to this 45-minute so-called public comment section. All it does is designed to do is constrain public comment, not really get public comment. It's designed to make sure that only certain people have enough time to speak. And you know that if you all were in public and we were meeting, that this would not stand, because many of us would not accept it. So stop your cowardly deception and open up the public input process and allow all of us to speak and share and really take the input that is being put forward. And once again, we repeat our demands: disband the Metro, stop the pretextual stops, end all data-driven policing.
Okay, thank you.
And our last speaker, Madam Secretary, this will be our last speaker.
Okay, Jamie Garcia.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
The report of the Chief of Police, public comment, and all regular agenda items.
Okay, 3 minutes.
So I want to start by grounding my conversation in the understanding of mass incarceration, how the US is 5% of the global population, 25% of the world's prison population, and since 1970, the prison population has increased by 700%. 1 in 3 Black boys can consider that they will end up in prison. Prison is torture. This is the street to prison pipeline. So we are freedom fighters. We are people who are against white supremacy, and we stand against torture. That is why we come to this police commission. That is why we stand up against the white supremacy you are hearing on this during this public comment. So this is not a moment in time, but a continuation of history of a failed system where people pay with their lives on the street. The Black community has raised the alarm consistently year after year about the violent abuse that they receive at the hands of police. In 2019, 68% of biased police complaints were filed by the Black community. The Black community, making up 9% of the population, is 27% of the stops. The white people are more likely, is more likely to find contraband on white folks, right? So again, we see this bias, we understand this bias. This bias has existed for centuries. So the RIPA Act comes along and tries to reform this broken and violent system. It calls for the same thing: better policy, more data, more money to LAPD. We say no. Then you bring the California Policy Lab in with its multivariate analysis, its various benchmarks, which, ironically mirror what the OIG says. However, it attempts to rationalize the policing and the arresting of certain individuals in certain locations by looking at station level stops with the attempt to weed out the bad apples through the use of Teams 1 or Teams 2, which both were failed reforms and interventions instituted by the Christopher Commission and the consent decree. Bonner, you said long ago, we have been doing these reforms with the same results. Everything is failing. You look at the National Institute of Justice, they are saying these interventions are failing. You look at the BJA, they say these interventions are failing, yet you continue to legitimize your violence by continuing to move on with these same violent policing tactics. So what we are saying is stop this cycle of violence. We no longer want policing in our communities. We are reimagining the world. We are freedom fighters. We are human rights defenders, and we are ending white supremacy. So defund the police. And last, I want to say, I will fight you on my PRA that you ignored, PredPol, PRA 206032, where PredPol has the city's data hotspot maps. You need to address why this is happening, why data has now fallen into the hands of the PredPol Incorporated. And so that needs to be addressed as well. And I expect an explanation, Eileen Decker.
Okay, thank you. That concludes public comment, Madam President.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Appreciate that. Colleagues, we have a number of items on the regular agenda. 3 items, the first 3 items, A, B, and C, are carried over from October 27th. They're listed as items, as I said, 3A, 3B, 3C. This is the Inspector General's report relative to a review of stops conducted by LAPD in 2019, the consent to search, and the search and arrest policy developed by the department. I'm going to bring all 3 matters forward for discussion. So all 3 matters are being called forward for questions and discussion, even though we will take the votes separately because they are interrelated. And of course, we have received written public comment. Those that we received within the time period requested have been included on the links and will be posted per usual on our site. I previously asked all commissioners to take advantage of the weeks since we received the presentation in October to follow up with the Inspector General or the department. And I trust everyone has taken advantage of that time to ask individual questions. I ask today we focus, if we can, on next steps and moving forward. I understand, Madam Secretary, that Ms. Rhodes is one of the people available from the department to speak. And I assume the Chief of Police. And if you could bring Ms. Rhodes up, and I see we have the Inspector General's office as well. So I'd like to begin my questions. As I said, I'm going to be focused on next steps and assuming the report is, Ms. Rhodes, I think this question would be for you, or these questions that I have. Assuming the report is accepted by the commission, I'd like to focus on next steps. And when we last met, I'm sorry, are you there, Ms. Rhodes?
I am. if you can hear me, I don't see any of you on my screen, nor do I see myself.
So
hold on.
We do hear you, and there we go. Okay.
So I can see myself. I can't see you, but if you can see me, that I will try to go off verbal questions rather than facial
expressions. Yes.
Expressions. Yes.
Well,
Thanks.
We can see you, Ms. Rhodes, and more importantly, we can hear you. So at least we can have the question and answer. Thank you. Last we met, I had asked if you would please take the time and look at some other reports I had read that were published by the Center for Policing Equity, NYU Policing Project, and of course the RIPA report issued by the state's RIPA Advisory Board. First, have you had an opportunity to review those reports?
I have.
Okay. And the reason I asked for that review in part is because I saw, and certainly with the RIPA data now being mandated throughout the state, not just, and that's of course for California, but other police departments throughout the country are also working on addressing stop data. And some of these reports I thought provided a framework and some guidance on how to proceed forward. And so my general question for you is, after having looked over the guidance and the details, and be it academic studies and practical studies, do you feel that they offer additional guidance beyond the recommendations in the IG report on ways to effectively move forward in analyzing stop data?
I do. I think they provide us with some interesting alternatives and framework on which we can hang the way we analyze and the way we implement data.
And beyond what the specifics of the IG report, is it a more holistic report? Could you explain generally what the how the particular guidance perhaps differs or adds context?
Sure. So the RIPA report, if you read it, there is much of that talks about best practices in collecting data that the LAPD is doing. There are some training issues that are not necessarily involved in our training, but we get elsewhere. We will be working to make sure that we comply with that. The Center for Policing Equity and the Policing Project at NYU is a guidebook, and that is specifically was written, at least it says in the foreword, for law enforcement agencies. And it's very helpful in terms of explaining why we should collect data, how we should collect data, ways of analyzing data generally. Of course, it's a global look, or at least, it looks at the nation. These are issues for the nation, and we will bring it back to issues for LAPD. But it is a how to look at modern day policing and to use data as a tool, which, can identify and reduce harmful outcomes, racial disparity, and benefit law enforcement and the community. It also gives, it talks about how to implement this through training and analysis. And so it's a very good framework for us to look to. Some of the things we may not completely follow because it's a framework and sort of a smorgasbord, which we will be using as we believe that is most valuable to LAPD specifically. And we'll be working with both the Office of Operations and the Community Outreach Development Division to tailor any response to the data specifically to the City of Los Angeles.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Rhodes. If I could turn attention to the data collection process, and as the IG highlighted, the importance of getting correct, accurate information, complete data on the RIPA card or the AFDR. Can you explain in terms of next steps, how the department is envisioning next steps to improve the data collection process before getting to data analysis, which is a whole nother thing, just the data collection? What steps do you envision in moving forward?
Sure, I think there are two prongs for data collection. That's training and technology. So I have spoken and worked with Assistant Chief Grimala about training. We need to make sure that our data going into any analysis, the data would be accurate and complete. The IG's report, as you know, identified some errors and some inconsistencies. I have spoken to Dr. Pinnell, and there will be training to address the accuracy and consistency of the AFDR, which then feeds into the RIPA data. Currently, the AFDR allows for a primary reason for a stop, and there are often multiple reasons, as in the sort of example I gave when we last spoke. And we really need better articulation. All of that will be going into training. Additionally, I know that Dr. Pinnell is looking at some of the training in the guidebook that the NYU and others put out, and to see if that can fit and add to the training we're doing. So that's the first prong. The second is technology. It was noted in the IG's report. I think you may remember that there is a gap between the stop and the completion of the FDR, and that can contribute to human error, memory, and other things. So for that reason, we have implemented, and we commit to continuing to convert AFDR to an officer's handheld device, or the sort of in-car computer, as well as the computer in the station. And we will be looking to try to make sure that as many as possible, when practicable, there may be times when an officer is unable to complete the AFDR essentially contemporaneously with the stop. But that is another way of recording the data that we are looking at. So those are the two prongs.
Okay. Thank you for that. I would like to turn your attention to the data analysis portion, and improving that in terms of getting real-time data, or maybe real-time might not be the right terminology, data as quickly turned around as possible so that it can always be analyzed, and integrate that into the overall management of the department, whether it be in ComStat or other data management tools. And can you explain the plan for that?
Sure. So first off, the department has invested in a new software system, which is the same software system used by the IG, so that it can analyze in the same way and with the same ability to pull up if something were taken out or if something were put in, what the difference would be. So that's a first investment in technology and training to be able to code things properly. The department is committed to looking at that data for 2020. But moving forward, we plan to implement in 2021 to make a clean break, and because 2021 is only, frankly, a few weeks away, a system that will analyze and correlate the data to make it more accessible to all our 21 divisions, where training and actually the stops actually happen. So we want to roll out sort of a matrix to the divisions. That matrix at bottom will include sort of our core values: reverence for the law, which means that the stops have to be constitutional; service to the community. To protect and to serve, we need to protect our community, and safeguarding victims against, violence, and reducing crime and violent crime. And that includes proactive policing, and then the responsibility to the people, a fairness to all, procedural justice, which we are putting in many of our policies, explaining what we are doing to the public and why we need to do a better job explaining, and emphasizing best practices. So we'll be rolling out something that talks about the basis for the stop, whether or not there was a search or getting people out of the car, and the basis for that, and the results, including contraband found and/or arrests. Again, we're committed to working with the Office of Operations and the Community Outreach and Development Division to use this analysis as a tool, push it down to the divisions so that they can look at it and really analyze what we are doing, why, and what impact it has, with as little gap in time as we can manage.
Okay. I know that to my colleagues, there are many more questions I could ask in each of these categories, and I think the commission is must, assuming the recommendations are accepted, we must continue to do oversight and work with the department in terms of ensuring all of this is happening, the collection of accurate information, the quick and swift analysis, and the proper use of that in adjusting procedures, tactics, operations, and use it just as crime data has been used for many years. It's effectively 21st century policing, which is why the state passed this law. And we as a commission must be better at reviewing and conducting oversight in the use of data and data like this, which is, as I said, required by the state law, but they've given us an opportunity to really address this. I do want to address, I think with the Inspector General, either the Inspector General or Assistant Inspector General, the comment keeps arising about crime and the correlation. And as I read the report that has been presented to the commission, and I've read it now several times in the hopes of ensuring my understanding of it, but as I read, and your recommendations are that low-level traffic stops can be reduced or eliminated without impacting crime. At least that's what the data that you've analyzed suggests. Obviously, part of the department's mission will be to continue to review that, and our job to oversee that. But have I read the report generally correctly when I say that low-level traffic stops can be reduced or eliminated without impacting crime? Because with respect to those cases, there was no arrest and contraband wasn't found, as I dove into the data that you analyzed. Is that a correct statement, Mr. Inspector General?
Yes, that's basically correct. And the last piece of what you said was the key part for us, that in the vast number of stops that we looked at, the number of arrests or contraband found was extremely low with regard to these particularly low-level traffic stops. And so I think you characterized it correctly.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure, because there seems to be, I think, a lot of misunderstanding or misperceptions about the report. Colleagues, I'm sure you all have some questions. I don't want to use all the time up on that. If you could let me know by opening your microphone if you have a question. Commissioner Goldsmith, I see you open.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad to see that we're moving forward with this, and hope that we do adopt the report, as I think it represents an important shift and an important commitment to reimagining policing and shifting away from crime suppression approaches, specifically those, as Commissioner Decker pointed out in the IG's report, verifies that don't actually reduce crime or address crime. And I agree with, of course, what the commissioner said about, our role is about policy setting and accountability and oversight, and the department's role is to implement these recommendations in a way that, is appropriate for, as it weighs other factors related to how they allocate resources and address crime. And so the commission would not, micromanage those details. But I do think it's wise, as Commissioner Decker said, to focus on next steps. And I'd specifically be interested in a couple things, some of which is echoing what Commissioner Decker said. But one is there's a call for some new policies in the IG report. One is the consent search policy, which we're addressing today. And then the other is around stops and post-stop activity. And so I'd be interested to know when we would see a draft of that policy or policies and encourage the department and the IG in developing those to look at best practices elsewhere. I know pretext stops have been eliminated in some departments, and so I'd be interested in how that's going. Is that, is there an unintended consequence? Is it effective? And that might be another opportunity to dig a little deeper into consent searches as well. I think the policy on the table today is, we'll talk about that in a minute, but should go forward. But I think it merits a deeper dive as it relates to post-stop activity in general. I know, as some of the public commenters have said today, consent stops have also, consent searches have also been prohibited in some departments. So I'd be interested again in, is that helpful? Are there unintended consequences? Is that worth considering? So the first question is about when can we see the draft policies? And the other question is related to metrics. Appreciate the deep dive just then a minute ago about data collection. Obviously, that's really vital to the commission being able to perform its role in accountability and oversight. And I think it would be helpful to identify a few metrics that the commission kind of focuses on. We do this in other arenas like the citing and arresting people experiencing homelessness. We've talked about it with youth diversion, but could we get, a regular report, perhaps the first one comes soon just to monitor implementation, and then we get them quarterly or something like that. But I think the key is identifying these metrics, which were alluded to in the IG's report. And I think some of the public commenters, in particular, the Urban Peace Initiative has a detailed list of potential metrics to consider. So, one would obviously be looking for that significant reduction, if not elimination, of stops for minor traffic violations as a pretext. Of course, if there's legitimate traffic stops and or stops that are related to reasonable suspicion, those would go forward, and I think we all support those. But so looking for that reduction in or shifting away from pretext stops, looking for the progress toward eliminating racial disparities in these stops, and I think the community trust survey that we do from time to time, which I hope becomes on a more regular basis, is also a way to sort of monitor, are these practices changing the way people experience the LAPD, and particularly in communities that have low trust, like Black communities. And then the third thing is more of a request than a question, but I would hope to see the chief and the department get involved in advocacy around alternatives to addressing the increase in violence and increase in guns on the street, which we're all concerned about. And we certainly want the department to have the tools it needs to address those. And so the chief got very involved in advocating for alternative dispatch to make sure there's a sufficiently funded therapeutic response to mental health calls. And so would like to see the chief and certainly the commission to play any role it can in advocating similarly for alternative prevention, intervention, community-based solutions to addressing the spike in violence as we see a parallel decline in the use of pretext stops. So that concludes my questions/comments, and look forward to hearing from the department and the IG on those.
So I guess from the department, Commissioner, as to the first two, I think that the department will be reporting back in terms of training and in terms of findings. I think that is something that the department regularly does to the commission, and we will be able to do that in the future as well, and fully intend to. As to I cannot give you a date certain as to when you will see a new policy. As you are fully aware, I think this goes through a lot of different procedural stops, and frankly is one of the things that is very valuable is talking to a subcommittee on these things. I will tell you that this is not, to the extent that there is any concern that this will be a report that is put aside and we won't talk about this later. I think I would like to allay that concern if that exists, because this kind of data, and especially the right kind of analysis of this data, which we are working on, should be a tool for us that benefits both us and the community. And it is a tool that I think, as Commissioner Decker said, we have been using data for crime. We now should also use data for stops. And then we should really marry the two to come up with what you were talking about, like, does it work? Does it not work? I also would say that we have reached out through the Major City Chiefs Association to discuss with other police departments, especially if we can talk to large police departments on their position on stop data. And we have looked at least the states of Washington, Oregon, New Mexico, and Delaware, who have, those are states that have either Supreme Court, Appellate Court, or even Superior Court decisions relating to stop data. Moreover, the ACLU forwarded us, I was in contact with them based on their letter, and they forwarded us Rhode Island and Connecticut that also have certain laws. We are looking at those. We will have to potentially, with the help of a subcommittee, do a deeper dive into what happens from law to, what are the consequences, as you said. And I think we want that information, or as much as we can get, in crafting any future policy with the help of the subcommittee. I don't know if that answers, you may have other questions. Maybe I've not answered your question, so let me know.
Thank you, Ms. Rose. Commissioner Goldsmith, did you have follow-up, or no? It looked like you were satisfied.
I appreciate that. I'll let the conversation continue.
All right, thank you. Thank you. And just for follow-up, Commissioner Soboroff, I do want to thank you for volunteering to be on that subcommittee with myself. I certainly appreciate that. Ms. Rhodes has referenced it a few times, and certainly our intent is to do the deeper dive with the department, but also bring it back to the full commission for further conversations so everyone can be aware of the progress. Commissioner Soboroff, did you want to ask?
Sure. Not a question, but this is just my understanding, and I'm sure some people will totally agree with it and others will totally disagree with it, and hopefully there's some in the middle. The reports from the Inspector General, which will probably be approved today, bring them to the table. Bring these reports to the table. It doesn't create, the reports of the Inspector General do not create the new policy. The community comments that have been discussed today from both sides, and writings and communications are also coming to the table, and they won't. None of them will be the new policy, but they're at the table for the new policy to be determined. And so is the opinion of the rank and file through their league. There are many officers who deserve a voice at the table, and if that mechanism is through their league, so be it. But that does not create the new policy. It deserves a seat at the table. So are best practices. And so are court cases. So as I see this, we're not creating a new policy, but what we're doing is setting seats at the table. And certainly the chief will be at the table, and he describes it as a round table, not as a table with a head. So I think that I think this is appropriate. It's healthy, and it's very difficult. But I appreciate the work of the Inspector General, even though I may not line by line agree with it, and I may not line by line agree with the community comments or the comments of the league. I believe they all deserve a place at the table, and from that table, will come a new policy that will make LA a better place for all. So I appreciate this the beginning of this process.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's clear we all have a lot of work to do, as does the department. Commissioners Kalante, Mr. Bonner, I'm sorry, I see your microphone is open, sir.
Sure, thank you. I suppose I'd first start with a question either for you or Commissioner Soboroff on the last one. From a process standpoint, I'm a little unclear as to the distinctions that are being drawn here about policy that may be coming forward. I interpret certainly 3B and C to reflect new policy or new changes in operations. First, I could appreciate some clarification as to what the items are and how you see them fitting into our policy making.
Well, I think they're somewhat self-explanatory. The Inspector General's report we are reviewing. There are a number of recommendations in it, some of which request, most of which require substantial additional work after today. We do have, and thanks to the efforts of, I believe, Ms. Rhodes's department, with the direction of the chief, 2 policies that have also been presented to us today that are related and recommended in the report, but that is not everything that the Inspector General recommends. Mr. Inspector General, do you want to either provide further clarification for Commissioner Bonner or further details on the distinction between items A, B, and C and their interrelationship?
I'd certainly give it a shot. One thing that I'd like to say in response to a number of the comments that have been made by commissioners, including Commissioner Bonner, as well, is that yes, we recognize also that there is a lot of further work to be done. Commissioner Soboroff described sort of the roundtable discussion that needs to occur. In one aspect of that is how the department is going to address these stops differently in the future if these recommendations are adopted. And there's a comment before about how some of what was looked at in the report says that the low-level stops for traffic violations didn't necessarily sort of lead to stoppage of crime. Although we found that largely to be true, there's also some nuance to that question.
Okay, Mr. Inspector General, you're not answering my question, which is Mr. Bonner's question. He asks about the distinctions between the policy being implemented and what we have, your report, and items B and C. That's a procedural answer, not a substantive answer about your report, but I see the Chief of Police is looking to jump in.
Well, I don't know if jump is the right word, but let me generate, because this is our obligation. The Inspector General's report now is now upon the department to respond to this. Commissioner Bonner, 2 of the aspects, the search and arrest warrant service procedures, dealt with some earlier reforms that were needed in the aftermath of this past summer to tighten and clarify what our expectations of men and women conducting search and arrest tactics would be. Secondly, on consent to search, that a verbal acknowledgement would be articulated and demonstrated on a body worn, and in the absence of a body worn video, that it would be a written approval absent probable cause or reasonable suspicion to conduct a search, just a purely consent. That is interwoven into this report, which speaks to the frequency in which people are searched and the rate they're asked to exit a vehicle, and then the search and the outcomes of those searches, and whether or not that consent is over relied upon or is actually accurate, because we saw some of the earlier matters of looking at body worn video that the Inspector General's report said the accuracy was not always there. Was that a consequence of time and distance, or was that confusion on the officer's part, or what was it? So what we're doing today is that we, of course, worked with the Inspector General as well as the subcommittee, and anticipating significant issues that we could move immediately on, that being the consent to search articulation, that would be on body worn or signed. We're putting in the tactical search parameters of search warrants and arrest warrants, because again, from a point of respect for people, fairness, constitutional law, the fact that we're going to be working in a lawful way, that's encumbered in this. Because and then lastly, the recommendations by the IG can be placed in the categories of crime strategy, written policy, FI cards, data collection. You know the bottoms, the buckets. In those buckets, there's overlay into the RIPA report, and there's overlay into the Center for Police Equity and New York University, and those guidebooks and reports. That body of work there's overlaps, there's pursuit of in each of those buckets that the Inspector General identified, that the department's committed to working going forward to make measurable and meaningful progress in each of those areas. We don't agree with all aspects of all three reports, nor do we disagree with them. I think there's general consensus that there's much overlap and there's much areas for us to move forward and more accurate reporting and more guidance to our officers as to, for instance, instances in which people are asked to exit a vehicle. There is, as a report indicated by the Inspector General, there is training on this, or guidance, but it's not really clear. Handcuffing of individuals, again, some consolidation of our policies and procedures so that it's clear as to circumstances in which people are handcuffed. And then the matter of how long does that a stop continue? When is it for a minor equipment violation? Should it be an inquiry, a determination by the officer, or is it extended based on some reasonable suspicion or more articulable facts? So that body of work that the Inspector General's recommendations, we see working with the New York University. Our outreach to the Center for Police Equity, but will be to invite them in. We'll work with the Inspector General. We certainly work with the subcommittee, and importantly, the rank and file of this organization, so that when we come up with guidance and we define the next steps forward, that we're all doing this together and we understand the desired conduct, and it's granular across each of the 21 areas, how it's metricing or how it's measuring out. How does this, as we go about these strategies, we pull these what I'll call levers, how does that impact the ratios that we see in 77th Division that we may see in, say, Wilshire Division? And are there tactical issues going on at a local level that we need to take more direct action with? So this is a good step. I think it's important. But coming out, there's not going to be a single document policy on this. I see this as strategically impacting how we go about policing as we enter 2021.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think I can understand it probably most clearly, at least relative to 3C in terms of there, but at least with A and B, and I'm putting out the observation for and welcoming further clarification from the chief or anyone else. But I see them as all very much interrelated. Number one, and I see it also going to what might, at least what I think of as kind of the heart of the matter. And there may be 3-4 hearts of the matter, if you will, but at least what I'm referring to is the broad, kind of ongoing perennial conversation that I've referred to before in terms of the tension between the community and the police. And we know that a lot of it relates to the interactions relative to stops. We know that, I believe. And, my goal, of course, would be to make sure that we're making the necessary changes to assure the community that it's going to be, that they're going to not have to keep raising this issue and having the experience that they've brought forward. And I've said for the officers, you don't want every 3 weeks the rules to be changing and for people to be having to be retrained and having to read new rules and regulations and understanding that. And so I see it as potentially making a generational, change, meaning a change that hopefully will have a long-term kind of impact. And to do that, I feel that, we still need to be very clear on what it is, what the quote problem is that we say we're addressing. Because one view might be an acknowledgement that there are outcomes that are being generated by the status quo that we might see as unacceptable. And I can reach that conclusion without getting into the questions of why that is. That's a necessary part of the discussion at some point in time. But just in the very principle first of saying that the structure currently is producing an outcome that is unacceptable to at least me and to many of us, but also to large portion of the stakeholders who are the recipients of services from the department. So when it's the difference also of saying the goal is to reduce those disparate outcomes, that's one problem, and that's one thing you'd need to understand, and maybe a set of things to address that. The other is, the problem is a lack of constitutional policing or other missteps that are happening and things are going wrong. And then, okay, that's part of the problem, that we're correcting potentially some of those behaviors or those things. But those are different statements of the problem, so to speak. And then the outcome is the outcome that we're expecting and hoping 2 years from now or 3 years from now that the numbers on will just look different, and we will see success is the numbers looking different, coming forward. So I'm trying to understand that, because when you understand what problem we're trying to fix, what outcomes we're trying to bring about, to me, that tells me then, okay, what are the steps to get there? What are the necessary solutions? And right now, to me, it still feels like we are moving ahead potentially with solutions. And I'm just going to speak directly to this issue of pretextual stops, which is kind of the third rail issue that is under discussion, as I understand it right now, with the communities demanding, an end to it. The department very concerned because they see it as a necessary tool and part of policing in some ways. And to me, if you're going to use a necessary tool, in this regard, you got to have a reservoir of public trust that is so deep that people understand and trust that it's going to be sparingly, it's going to be done appropriately, and they give you the benefit of the doubt that it's being done with their best interest in mind to address the violence in these communities. So I'm just saying all of this to underscore what I see as the seriousness of where we are and the reason why I think there's a case for some deliberation. So let me ask you, Chief, it looks like you're wanting to jump in before I make my final points, but I'm just making the point that so when I think the public comment was helpful in the last 2 weeks, as I was just chided for, I've made the effort to go into the community and start that process. I say start that process because you need to understand that much more to really see it and to talk with people who are not bought into this process and structure. But I'm learning things there. The comments that came in, the Push LA letter. I want to know what we know about the points they're making about how Washington and Rhode Island and Connecticut have achieved this. I agree with the point in the Urban Institute letter that this is an opportunity for the CSP Bureau to lead this cultural shift. And this was my purpose before for referencing to how their mindset is matching up with what's going on with the counties trying to do. And I've read through the PPL letter this morning that, to me, part of the key question there is this issue of what is the role? They're asking the question, where's the commission's plan? And I do think we should be clear, which parts of this are they asking us to actually do what I understand officers resist and resent, which is people who are not sworn, who are not trained in law enforcement, getting involved in directing police tactics and strategies. I would like not to have to do that. But I'm not clear whether they are asking us really to do that, to say that they want us to define these things in greater detail, or are they asking us to give some strategic direction to the conversation? So I need to understand in my own mind. I would like very much to have additional time to understand, all of these points before feeling that we're moving down a path that may not be directed at the problem that we're trying to solve. So that's my my comment, my question, Chief, if you have an observation on it. But that's what, as I listen to the conversation going forward and what others have to say, that's where I am, is still trying to understand whether we're giving this enough time.
So thank you. I interpret this effort is to build community trust and build that trust in a manner that police work is, that the work that we do in our communities is proactive, that it's responsive to community needs, that we ensure respect for people in each individual stop or each individual encounter, that we demonstrate a reverence for the law, and that our service to the community is maintained. And that means providing information. There's a lot to be learned from this data still. The accuracy of it is falling short. So what the underlying reasons for stops, what the underlying reasons for the actions being taken, I think we can improve upon. I also think that informing the public whether it be in the next 6 months, a year, 2 years, as we move through this process, this generational shift, is that as we inform with development of policies and guidelines as to when people are asked to get out of a vehicle, when decision to handcuff an individual is made, there are instances where both those are absolutely required and necessary and productive in providing for community safety. There's also a perception that it's overdone and over-relied upon. And so that's where the guidance and the development of our people and their actions come in. And that's where I see the development working together as a group of collectively coming to terms. There's an often referenced conversation about Washington, New Mexico, Vermont, places that have, or I think it's Maryland, that have outlawed pretextual stops. And our efforts to date have found zero results as far as desired outcomes of removing those disparities. And so that gives me some pause that more work needs to be done with those agencies and those departments to understand what is it, have they actually done some window dressing, or they have actually addressed some of the underlying issues and what have been the consequences of those. And so there's, this is not, I think this is a conversation and a dialogue going forward. It's not a one and done, but I do see the consent search as a step, as an effort to address some immediate actions that the department is moving forward with, acknowledging that there are instances in which people do not believe that consent was granted, and yet a consent was asserted. So we want officers to be more explicit about that. Hey, can I search you? Can I search your car? You can say no, and you can stop me at any time. Move on. Now, if an officer, and I've heard the critics, and to those who believe that the officers are being hamstrung, a person involved in a violent crime, person involved in any criminal activity, and the officer has a reasonable suspicion to conduct a stop or to conduct a search, this policy does not interfere with that in any fashion or form. It's explicit that this is solely for a matter of consent, when an officer is seeking a consent. But that point there is meant, this whole policy is meant to build trust and also to demonstrate a procedural justice of fairness and an openness about and transparency about how we go about our work. And it was made, and this heightened period of reform, of this summer of transformation, of doing it much quicker than we have done. Perhaps this commission has taken a much quicker agenda and process than previous commissions. And that is to meet the moment. And that is to meet this period of time in which we see, feel, and hear the demands. But we're also very cautious in this time of increasing crime, particularly violent crime, that we have to be clear that proactive policing, officers going out and looking and searching for people who are involved in acts of violence and crime and conducting themselves in a way they prey upon communities. We need those officers out there. And I think the vast majority of Angelenos want those officers out there. What they want is to do it, though, in a way that's respectful of the community and is not suppressing them, is not punishing them, is not like a cover on top of them. And so I think there's a lot of conversation here that is relevant. And I think I'm looking forward to moving forward on these recommendations by the IG. I would ask for this commission's support on the arrest and search warrant protocols. I think that while there is no change, it reinforces our expectations. And I believe that the consent search item is a fair movement in an effort to address an underlying concern or accusation that officers are not obtaining consent. And so we want to demonstrate that by a practice that consent is explicit and not implicit, and that it is something that the officer is acting lawfully and in respect to the people in which they're engaged with. And at the same time, not jeopardizing that officer's safety because they're not conducting a pat-down search because they don't have consent. If they have a reasonable justification for doing that, they're to do that search.
So that's all, by the way, very helpful, Chief, to hear your perspective and reflection on it. I would ask again, then going back to this question of, because to me, again, you take all that you're saying, all that's reflected in the entire conversation, and I'll continue to say that the only way you kind of break the cycle that we've talked about and to kind of really is to have shared ownership of these strategies, which means that the community can trust the strategy and the implementation because they participated actively in in its development, understand how it's calibrated, which may be different in one community to the next, and so on and so forth. And then also can share in some responsibility as well for the success. How do you, in terms of the process that's been described, the table and so on and so forth, and with regard to the IG report in particular, you know, my request, I think, is still and was going to be that, or was going to be, and I think still is, that you really come back to us with a more, definitive implementation plan, if you will, meaning that I'm really, interested in hearing from not just the senior command staff as well, but in particular the people who are going to be implementing at the end of the day, the assurance as well that, yeah, they know what this is, and because the other thing I'm trying to not have as part of the outcome is this constant sense that, okay, here are a bunch of unelected, unknowing people have forced something on the officers on patrol unknowingly, well-intentioned, but just, unknowingly. And they will, of course, as an institution, you and others will say, yes, of course, we'll move forward and do what we're asking. And then we still may not see the result we're trying to get. And next year we'll be wondering why that is. And it may be because really there is some, real world disconnect between what we're saying on the paper and what we're saying at these meetings and how life exists for a person in the community experiencing these interactions and how life exists for the police officer. So even that part of it, I'm going to be looking for really more assurance that that the paper that's before us really lines up with the realities of what the stress that everybody has to encounter. And I'm speaking again, the people in the community who need to understand what it is that what change it is we're saying that they're being brought on their behalf, but also the officers who I think want, and I'm speaking to those who want the confidence to know that what they're doing, and being asked to do, is backed by the community that they're protecting and serving. So how do you just before I close, at least my questions and comments, can you speak a little more in terms of really moving forward? How do you see then coming forward? Because I agree with the other comment in some of the letters that the IG report, there could use some context, that some of the recommendations do leave room for, interpretation and discretion in those things. So it's all still, very much involved. How do you see bringing it together to something that could, more definitive?
Well, I see, excuse me, just the way in which it is written affords me confidence that we can work through as a group and make progress, that it is not overly specific, that it doesn't take such drastic actions. And also simultaneously, you have two documents before you, 3B and C, that are definitive, that are written and articulate as to certain requirements. And so it's a balanced approach where when we're ready, we have those documents in front of you. And we will train and develop our people. Dr. Luann Pinnell, Martin Baeza, Chief Grimala, they have worked with those two documents and believe that it is a balanced and accomplishable expectation of our people. Now, to a rank and file officer in the street, is it an added step on consent? Yes. And this is a burden. And this is an added burden. And depending on perspective, there'll be those that will resent it, as they resented in law enforcement the Miranda rights, as we resented other social justice and criminal justice reforms that place the onus on the state and on the law enforcement officer because of matters of community trust. It is critical to me that, for instance, you do not have a conversation today about exiting a vehicle and the circumstances, or handcuffing an individual beyond what's already within the existing book of our work, or this matter of what constitutes a pretext stop, because I don't think we're ready for it. As I've said before, there's much of proactive policing is a result of observational activity of officers, attention being drawn to the conduct of a driver, of a passenger, of a person on the street. And many of those come up with zeros. They're not. That doesn't mean that the officer's actions was racist, prejudiced, or biased. It means that they're doing what I'm asking them to do. Now, structurally, we've changed some of the actions we've asked our people to do because we saw an over-reliance on certain activities. But yet when we get down to what really matters here to me is I think we're going to start capturing at 21 areas these certain measures, about 5 different measures that we can start questioning why are there differences and to get the nuance of understanding what's actually occurring and what may be a desired and undesired outcome. I applaud your concern that we not just go blindly into the dark here in a time when we're seeing an increased level of violence and we're seeing an increased challenges of public safety. This is important work here that our officers feel supported, that they feel like their actions are not just lawful, but that they're productive in building trust in a community. But that's messy. The first 2 parts are there. It's the building trust in a community that we're trying to work with here by making informed and educated reforms and changes in both how we act, but also how we communicate and describe the basis or essence of why we're acting.
Well, I just thank you. I just close with, on the last point about the building trust, and you have one of the third of 3 major elements of trust behind competence and integrity. We talked about, the competence issue. People need to trust the data and that it's being reported and collected and all that, that there's integrity in that. But it's that last piece of developing the sense that all of this really is being done with the public and the community, the best interest of the public and the community in mind, is what I see is going to be the toughest part of this. And that's why I'm wanting to insist that there be some strong approach to a shared development of the approach, the policy, and as well, that includes not just the officers but the community.
Right.
My view, but I'd say, and I know that we're not, I hope we're not done with the discussion this morning, but I'm still, I can probably, based on the chief's comments and recommendations, can get somewhat more settled with what you're asking us to do on B and C. I'd like to hear some more conversation, if there is any, from the others today about the report, because I also just say that I see that as connected to the complaint report that we've not yet, that's not before us today, and that we've not also seen. So I'm still going to think about that a little bit as the discussion goes forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonner. Commissioner Kalanche, I know we've had a significant conversation this morning, but I didn't want to not give you an opportunity. Commissioner, please go ahead.
Just a couple of thoughts. I'll be brief. I do appreciate the conversation and the work that's gone into putting this report together, and actually look forward to seeing what the subcommittee and the chief come up with. And I do think that there is an opportunity to also include community. I think for me, what's really important is the data collection and data sharing and data analysis. So if moving forward in 2021, if there is an actual way of using the data to make changes at the division level, so that it's more real time and usable, I think that would be important. The other thing, and I think I requested this when this first came to us, was creating some sort of overlay area for CSP. I think that it's really important that we've invested so much in these CSP areas as far as building trust, that we need to understand the data for these pretext stops. And it's really, it's an indicator of building trust. So I think that having an overlay, and I did talk to Inspector General about this, and it's something that we're going to work on in, collecting that, taking the data that exists already in this report, but then also kind of zeroing down to the CSP site, so that as we're kicking off the work of the new bureau, that we actually have a data set or a number that we can then compare as the work moves on in these areas. So those are the 2 things that are extremely important to me, and also figuring out how to Commissioner Bonner's point, how to include the community in some of this work. Since having grown up and I work and I live in an area where the community actually feels that these stops are are used in a way that is not consistent with good policing, whether it's real or perceived. I think it's really important part of building trust. So I look forward to seeing how we can engage the community and young people and how we move forward with developing some strategies and policies.
Thank you, Commissioner, for those important thoughts and words. So appreciate it. We've now had 3 weeks to review these items and talk to the department. And the California State Legislature passed the RIPA law to collect the data, but it's our obligation to analyze it and take action. We now have this report in front of us. It is the beginning of the conversation, is the beginning of the process. Well thought out, a report we've waited for, by the way, 9 months, and I thank the Inspector General's office for that. A considerable amount of work has gone into it with a thoughtful analysis and the drafting of 2 policies we can take action on today. So I'm going to call the questions and move these matters forward with the understanding our work has just begun. Commissioner Soboroff and I will take the lead, but every commissioner has an obligation to engage in this, engage the department on this, and engage the community on it. And I ask you to each work with Mr. Tiefenk in ensuring that the community and all interested members of the public and the department are engaged, and for each of you to take a leadership role in ensuring that your vision of how this should be implemented is done so. We all have that responsibility, even though there will be a subcommittee to try and get some of the, I'll call it the details down and work in a more hands-on way. With that, I'm going to call A, B, and C for a vote, and I'll just move down in order. As to item 3A, the requested board action is to approve the Inspector General's report. I will move it forward. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please open your mics and say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
It passes 4-1. With respect to item 3B, this is the also continued from October 22nd, related to the consent to search verbal advisement. The recommended board action is to approve the department's report. I will move it forward. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, excuse me. Opposed? That passes 5-0. Item 3C is the requested board action is to approve the department's report. I will move that matter forward. Is it seconded?
Second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
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 That passes 5-0 as well. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Inspector General, and all the staff and leadership that worked on this report. We are very grateful for that. Thank you very much for presenting it and bringing it forward. Thank you, Ms. Rhodes, for your presentation. And we'll move on to items 3D, E, and F. May I ask commissioners, do you have any questions on D, E, or F? I'd like to call the matters for which there are no questions.
No.
No questions. I'm going to then call them all in order. Item 3D, the requested board action with respect to this grant proposal is to approve the department's report and transmit concurrently to the mayor and city council. I will move that forward. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes 5-0. With respect to item 3E, the requested board action with respect to this contract is to approve the department's report and transmit to the mayor. I'll move it forward. Is it seconded?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you. And the final matter is on the regular agenda is item F, which is a report to be transmitted to City Council related to resources for domestic violence victim at essential businesses. I will move the matter forward to approve the report, transmit to the city council. All in favor? Is there a second? Excuse me.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Very well, it passes 5-0. Thank you. That concludes the regular agenda items. The board will now move into closed session. Thank you. Madam Secretary.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss agenda item 4A1 in accordance with Government Code 54957.
All right, I think we're back. Oh, I'm ready to go.
Yep.
Mr. T-Fink, can you read out?
Yes, Madam Vice President, the Board of Police Commissioners has concluded its work in closed session relevant to item 4A1. During closed session, President Decker was absent. The other 4 commissioners were present. Leary number 002-20. The commission's findings were adopted the chief's recommendations, which were tactics, tactical debrief, 1 Sergeant 1, 1 Police Officer 3, 4 Police Officer 2, and 3 Police Officer 1. Non-lethal use of force in policy, 1 Police Officer 3, 4 Police Officers 2, and 3 Police Officer 1. That concludes the report, and that vote was 4-0, again with Commissioner Decker absent.
Thank you, sir. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.